that was all well and good uh, for adjusting an overall image, but as I mentioned earlier, this image is particularly challenging. We've got these figures in the foreground, the horses, that represent the extremes of dynamic range. It's very akin to the kind of problem a wedding photographer faces, where wedding photographers are always fretting about dynamic range because you typically have a white bridal gown with lots of lacy details right next to black tuxedo, and so you've got both ends of dynamic range in a wedding shot. And the challenge is, how can you preserve the lacy details in the bridal gown while also bringing up some of the details in the groom's tuxedo? And similarly, if I work on the overall image and bring out details in the horses, this sort of washed out background can become even more washed out. What would be ideal would be if we could do curves adjustment layers on different parts of the image. And wonderfully, we can. So I'm going to turn off the visibility of this overall curves adjustment layer, and I'm going to load something we've worked with already, selections and mask. So I'll start with loading the selection of just the horses. And I name all my selections when I save them because I'm paranoid, but also it saves me work later. So I've selected just the horses now. Everything else is mask, the sky and the grass. And now, once I've made that selection, if I go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and choose Curves, I'll call it Horse Curves. Now my adjustment layer on horses, you'll notice up here on the Layers palette, I can see the mask. I can see that the white part's selected and the black part's masked. If I adjust the white and the dark point, and again, if I hold down the Option key as I drag this slider over for the white point, you notice only the horses are affected. I can adjust the white point on those. I could adjust the black point if I wanted to. And now what's even greater is I can do a curves adjustment that only affects the horses. I couldn't mess with that. Tell you what I'm going to do. Let me start out by going with a preset for linear contrast. Okay, that's going to add just a little bit of contrast. What I'd most like to do is bring up the detail around the eyes while preserving some of the detail in the whiteness of the fur. So I'm going to click on this and go just over the eyes. I can see where I am. I'm way down in the shadows here. And I'm going to bring that up. Now, because there's an anchor point here, it only affects this part of the curve. It doesn't pull up all the mid-ranges. And similarly, I can go way up here in the highlights and mess with that fur a little bit to where I get a dramatic contrast between the white highlights in the fur and the dark shadows. Well, that's great. My horses are looking pretty good. I've even brought up some detail in this horse on the left, some dramatic highlights in the mane on that horse on the left. But the grass is looking pretty pathetic, and the sky is quite washed out. So let's deal with the grass. I've made this selection previously, worked that out, so I'm going to load the grass. The grass is selected, the horses in the sky are masked, so I won't be working on those. Again, I go to Layer. Let's work it from the Layers palette. I can go down here to the Adjustment Layer button on the Layers palette and say I want to create a new Curves adjustment layer. You can see here the thing with the grass is I've got lots of mid-tones, very little shadow, very little lightness. The camera was mostly concerned, well, focusing on, I guess, the whiteness of the horse probably when it took the photo, and so it's not optimally exposed for the grass. So what I can do is, I think I'll just eyeball this, pull in the white point just a little, mostly pulling the dark points because I think the grass is overexposed. Got that. Might bring this down a little. It's looking a little too surreal for me. I've got that. That's pretty good in terms of lightness and darkness. One of the challenges, though, is it's increased the saturation of the image. So what I'm going to try first is going up here to this layer and changing the blend mode to luminosity. Nice. What I did then when I changed the blend mode to luminosity was to effectively tell Photoshop, look, I just want to adjust the lightness and the darkness on this layer. I don't want to affect the colors on the layer. So now I've done that, and now I'm pretty happy with this. Yeah, the main show is still the horses, but I've made the landscape, to my eye, look a little more natural with regard to them. And the only remaining part in terms of lightness and darkness I'm not very happy with is the sky. So once again, I'm going to load a selection I made before. I'm going to load the sky. Going to go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Curves. Where are you? Sky Curves. Got that in. And you'll notice the sky, if we look at the histogram, is mostly bright. So let's see, mostly lights. I'm going to bring up the darkness a little on that. If I really wanted to get finicky, I'd go back in and edit this mask a little. You can see part of the problem is it's overlapping a bit with the hillside there, and that's creating some visible artifacts. Scale that back a little. And just bring the darkness down here. Yeah. And then one of the other nice features about curves is the default is to edit all three color channels, red, green, and blue. But you can also go in and do a curves adjustment for each of the individual channels. So if I wanted to adjust the level of blue in the sky, I could go here to blue. I get a separate curve for blues. Again, it's mostly highlights. I can go in here, and I could decrease or increase the level of blue there. If I decrease it too much, I get greens and yellows. If I increase it, it begins to look purple and magenta. I could increase it just a tad, to make that sky a little more dramatic.